It could end up being in the mid six figures, that funding.
They were told previously.
Just pay for the road.
If Kramer Lake came in today,
Agenda is Trunk Highway 36, Lake Elmo Avenue intersection improvements. And I believe we have a presentation to start with from Washington County.
Yep. Good evening, council members. My name is Andrew Geeson, I'm project manager for Washington County. And tonight we will be providing an update on the Highway 36 and Lake Elmo Avenue intersection improvement project. I guess before I jump in, we do have Commissioner Kriesel here and Kevin Peterson from Washington County as well. So I have about a 10-minute presentation that I'm going to run through. We also have a layout that we can put on the table too. There might be a point near the end of the presentation we can get up and look at the preferred alternative, but I'll just jump into the PowerPoint. So during my presentation, I will provide an overview of the project background, need, funding, and schedule, recap the elected official goal setting meeting that was held back in the fall of 2021, recap engagement activities with the public, discuss the process used to evaluate a full spectrum of alternatives for this intersection, provide a recommended alternative, discuss short-term and long-term next steps, and open it up for discussion and to answer any questions. So jumping in, really kind of taking a step back, in 2001, MnDOT completed a corridor management plan for Highway 36, which included recommendations to construct a new St. Croix River crossing to Wisconsin, as well as to make improvements to 8 intersections along Highway 36. Over the last 20 plus years, many of the recommendations of this corridor plan have been completed, with exception to the intersections of Lake Elmo Avenue and Century Avenue, both that still remain intersections controlled with the traffic light. As everyone in this room likely knows, this intersection has an extensive crash history, with about 1 crash seen here every 2 weeks. And since the opening of the Highway 36 St. Croix River crossing in 2017, traffic volumes on 36 have continued to increase, which leads to increased congestion and delay seen at this intersection. Now, before I present the recommended alternative, we realize that the recommended alternative has many benefits, but it does not come with any drawbacks. In addition, due to the location of the existing buildings near the roadways, there's no silver bullet solution for this intersection. So therefore, if we do nothing at this intersection, delays will continue to increase, safety will decrease, and pedestrians, bikes, and snowmobiles will have limited options to cross Highway 36. So with much support from everyone in this room, we were able to successfully secure $30 million in federal and state funding for this project, with an additional $11.5 million of local funding programmed in 5-year CIPs. And here you will see a very high level schedule of how we go from a partially project funding award in 2020 to construction in 2026. We're currently finalizing the intersection study and environmental documentation phase. Final engineering is anticipated to begin shortly and will be completed in 2025, and necessary property acquisitions would then be acquired. And then similar to the recently constructed Manning Avenue interchange, we expect that construction of this project will last 2 full construction seasons, kicking off in the spring of 2026 and then wrapping up in the fall of 2027. So moving on to engagement efforts for the study, to date, we've completed 5 formal engagement events, including an elected official goal-setting meeting, an online comment period for the purpose and need statement, and 3 public open houses. The first event was an elected official goal-setting meeting that brought together policymakers from the city of Lake Elmo, city of Grant, Washington County, and MnDOT. And this meeting gave us a great understanding of your desired outcomes, priorities, and concerns. So some of the main desired outcomes and priorities we heard are to improve mobility and accessibility, improve safety, provide efficient access to Highway 36, maintain Grant Business District access and frontage road, minimize costs, minimize property impacts, provide a safe crossing of Highway 36 for peds, bikes, and snowmobiles, maintain expressway vision, have a cost-feasible project, and receive community support. And trade-offs and limiting factors that we heard included available funding or funding constraints, and right-of-way impacts and costs. And really to summarize this event, each agency certainly had their own specific concerns, but I feel that we can agree there was consensus of the importance of improving the safety at this intersection. So this led us to our first open house that introduced the project to the public. All 3 of our open houses were available both in person and online, and were all very well attended. We had over 100 people that attended our in-person open houses, and then thousands of residents viewed our materials online as well. Most of what we heard from this first open house was consistent with the original project goals, with safety being the most prominent comment recorded. Access, bike and ped improvements, property impacts, and adjacent frontage road was also frequently brought up, which was consistent with what we heard from the elected officials as well. So then, using all the technical information we gathered and what we heard from the community, a formal purpose and need document for improvements to this intersection was created, which stated that the purpose of the project is to improve vehicle safety, vehicle mobility, and bikeability, walkability in the Trunk Highway 36 and Lake Elmo Avenue intersection area. And the purpose and need document also included criteria that would be used to evaluate each alternative that is carried forward. So in the summer of 2022, we released the purpose and need document for public comment. Again, we received a significant quantity of page views and completed surveys, and we received overwhelming support for the purpose and need statement. So once we identified and gained community support of the project's purpose and need, we then started the alternative evaluation process. This is a 3-step process that considered all possible alternatives that could meet the project purpose and need. Step 1 and 2 are complete, and the results of those first 2 steps have been posted on the project website. We're currently finalizing the 3rd and final step, and then as you can see on this table, each step gets more detailed in how we evaluate alternatives. So step 1, we evaluated 20 possible alternatives, including both at-grade and grade-separated options on how well they improve overall vehicle safety and mobility at this intersection. And then through that evaluation, 8 alternatives were dismissed, and 12 alternatives were carried forward into step 2. As we moved into step 2 of our evaluation process, additional criteria was used to evaluate the remaining alternatives, including how the alternatives improved vehicle or safety for peds and bikes, allowed the addition of a future south frontage road, how intersections met spacing guidelines, and how alternatives minimized out-of-direction travel. Through this evaluation, 6 alternatives were retained and carried into our 3rd and final step. And then additional criteria was evaluated in our 3rd and final step of the process, including costs, property impacts, and wetland impacts. Through this step, two open houses were held to gather feedback from the public on the alternatives that were still being considered. So based on a combination of input from the public, feedback from our project partners, and our technical analysis, we are recommending the button hook ramp alternative, as it is a significant improvement to the existing intersection while minimizing costs, minimizing acquisition of private property, and minimizing project footprint. And we did want to note that this is a cost feasible option that can be funded today. So maybe there I'll pause. We could look at the layout, there's interest in that. I do have it on the screen. It kind of shows that preferred design. So if there's interest from the council to kind of go around the table and look at it, we could do that at this time.
Councilmember Beckstrom.
Just one question. I know in our, in 2021 when we had the elected meeting, I know one of the things that we brought up at that time was the Keats intersection, and because we were getting a lot of feedback at that time with it being so dangerous. And so is that included at all in any of these plans addressing that intersection?
Yeah, that's one of our kind of a short-term next steps. I'll just flip to that. So we are looking at doing some additional analysis regarding the planned closing at Keats Avenue at State Highway 36. And really, we're looking at that to ensure, that closure does not impact our design. So we are looking at that closer, maybe just to provide some perspective, looking at traffic volumes in this area. The average daily volumes on 36 are about 40,000 vehicles a day. Manning Avenue has about 20,000 vehicles a day. Lake Elmo Avenue has about 5,000, and then Keats has 1,000. So when you look at it, the big picture, the volumes on Keats is relatively low. But we are doing that additional analysis, and we're working over that really over the next few weeks, just to ensure that, again, if Keats does close and the frontage road is extended on the south, that we're making sure there's no fatal flaws with our design of that future closure.
Okay, so there would be a frontage road then that would connect to Keats
Yeah.
ideally? Because I think closing that off is certainly going to get people not happy either, so.
Yeah, and there's no, so MnDOT's looking at that. The city did look at that a number of years ago, kind of a long-term plan in this area for future extension of that frontage road. Right now, that closure or potential closure at Keats and extension, the frontage road is not part of this project, but it is part of the kind of long-term plan. So we want to look at that as we're looking at this project.
All right, thank you.
I guess a follow-up to that, as MnDOT, and this was news to us until maybe a couple weeks ago, that they were restarting to look at that again. As it is Trunk Highway 36, does the city or the county have any say in stopping them if they were to make that choice?
I would say that, MnDOT, maybe I'll look at it, Kevin, but I would assume that MnDOT would have to get municipal consent to move forward with that project. So the city or the county would have input if MnDOT elects to close that road.
And would part of the additional analysis, so obviously the preferred, for reasons we'll discuss coming up with the button hook is the preferred, are you implying that part of the additional analysis would be, is a frontage road compatible of plugging in to the button hook?
Yeah, it's really looking at the intersections of where those ramps, tie into the frontage road. And, assuming that that frontage road is extended, potentially if Keats closed, and now that traffic that was using Keats to access 36 is now using these proposed ramps to access 36, just making sure that the, kind of day one build and the 20-year forecasted volumes can operate for these style of ramps. That's basically the analysis we'll complete.
Would any of the analysis then also look to see how the frontage road would possibly plug in with the other two alternatives that had higher safety ratings, such as the tight diamond roundabout had the highest one? So would that be part of the analysis, or is it only for the preferred and to see how well it works with the frontage?
Yeah, right now we're just looking at the preferred alternative, which is that button hook design.
Thank you. Any other questions at this time?
Yeah, could we, oh, okay.
Administrator Schroeder?
Yes, I have a question concerning the longevity of this intersection. As I've discussed before, we've seen, you know, in the West Metro going from Highway 12, stoplights, 2 lanes, crossovers, to maybe 2 or 3 different designs over my lifetime. One of my concerns is the northern part of Lake Elmo, which you drive through right now, is, you know, rural residential, ag. When I just talked to the Met Council earlier today, and, you know, one of the things I said, what is the long-term plan for that? And, you know, can we divide that land up into, let's say, smaller allowable lots, 2.5 acre lots and stuff like that? And Met Council would not approve anything like that because that ag area, they want to reserve for future sewered growth. Now, it's going to be a long time, obviously, for that to happen, but the question is, are you looking out in the Met Council's, you know, they're looking 40, 50 years from now, saying that's when that's going to be sewered. Is this design going to work for that long?
Yeah, so I guess part of your packet was an evaluation matrix. You know, it looks at it, that whole spectrum of criteria. You know, that matrix is looking at 20-year forecast, 20 years past the build year, so we're looking at 2047 forecast. You know, that's really kind of the industry standard, is to look 20 years forecast for roadway projects. And so that's, when we do our analysis, we're looking at that 2047 timeframe. And that's based off, you know, really projected growth on this roadway. And part of that too is the zoning within your city as well.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hearn?
Yeah, thanks. Could you talk a little bit about the impact, I guess, maybe first on the Lake Elmo side here, as far as for the houses on the south end of this intersection, what kind of impact it would have on some of those properties along Lake Elmo Avenue, just south of the project?
Yeah, so I can switch back to the layout. You know, kind of looking at more of the zoomed in area, that new intersection just south of 36, that intersection would have turn lanes, and so to construct those turn lanes, there would be some widening of 36. And so when you widen the roadway, the ditches will move, so there's gonna be some grading work, you know, on the outside of that. As you continue south, you know, you taper out of those turn lanes, so the impacts get smaller and smaller till you tie in, and we're showing that we're tying in just north of the Discover Crossing entrance. I think it's 57th Street. So there would be some widening on 36 to accommodate
Trying to
those
look-
turn
So
lanes.
with the red dotted line, so would that be where all the trees have to be cleared through the dotted red line?
Yeah, the red dotted line is a pretty conceptual construction limit. You know, over the next few months, as we continue the design process, we're gonna look closer at that. It's a pretty high level assumption at this point. I would anticipate we can pull in those construction limits from what's shown on this exhibit.
And save some of the tree line for both the east and west side of that Lake Elmo Avenue?
Yep. Yep.
And then I guess with some of like the River Valley Christian Church and the 10689 60th Street North, again with those ones, again, it looks like that the red dotted line, I mean, goes through some of their even structures. Is that property then that has to be bought?
Yeah, maybe looking at, a council member, looking at the entire, you know, property impact, there's gonna be a number of, partial acquisitions. You know, it could be both permanent easements and temporary easements along here. There's probably about 20 property owners impacted. You know, the River Valley Church is probably one of the more significant property owners impacted. You know, taking a step back, and we were down to 6 remaining alternatives. all 6 of those alternatives had some sort of acquisition on the church. At that time, the church reached out to the county, indicated their interest in expanding, and since all the alternatives at that time remaining had acquisitions on the church property, they indicated they would want to relocate as part of this project. So we are looking at relocating the church as part of this. But beyond that, it's all partial acquisitions where no other like single-family homes or business would have to relocate as part of this preferred alternative.
And again, I apologize just for my uncertainty on this, but with those properties outside of the River Valley Christian Church, I mean, are those conversations that have already been had with them as far as, is this land that you're open to selling, or how does that process work?
Yeah, so, council member, our next step is to better define those construction limits. We're, again, gonna be working on that over the summer. Really, right-of-way acquisition begins in the fall of this year. That continues through 2025. A number of these property owners have been engaged on the project and have been coming to the open houses and reaching out to us. But until we really get consensus on one preferred alternative, we haven't, had those detailed conversations yet. But
That makes sense.
That is coming up in the process.
Okay.
Have there been projects of this size and scope in the metro where they have used button hooks recently? I'm not an engineer, but from driving in the metro, I feel like I'll refrain from what I was about to say. Is it still a best practice when there are other options?
Yeah, I don't know about, or council member, I don't know about recently constructed projects, but I know there are projects in the metro under design that are considering button hook alternatives. I don't recall the one offhand, but I believe there's one in the North Metro that MnDOT's looking at as well.
In terms of the tight diamond roundabout, is the cost higher due to additional properties, additional pavement, additional, what are kind of the variables, just so I can better understand why that then did not become the preferred?
Yeah, council member, so the tight diamond alternative is about $10 million more. Most of that cost is the construction cost, just additional infrastructure with, one of the options had 3 roundabouts, so it's a larger footprint, more concrete. The tight diamond alternatives also requires the realignment of the frontage road on the north side, 60th Street, so that is also additional infrastructure. And then there is some additional right-of-way costs associated with that, just more property impacts on the north side. That alternative would require the total take of a single-family home, so that also adds to the right-of-way cost. So most of it is construction, but there is some additional right-of-way acquisition costs associated with that.
Thank you. Councilmember Beckstrom?
So in looking at this, it seems as though there'd be a much more of an impact on the Lake Elmo side versus Grant. And you referenced 20 properties. I'm curious, of those 20 properties, how many of those fall within Lake Elmo? I mean, it appears that there's a couple of good chunks of land that will essentially be unusable with the frontage road.
Yeah, I'm just counting them right now. Yeah, it's pretty split. I'm counting about 8 properties on the north side. It looks like 9 properties on the south side.
Can you
There-
slide back your screen to one that's the wide view? Thank you.
Yeah, there are some larger parcels on Lake Elmo side of the roadway, especially with Sun Country Farm or the Bergmans. They own most of the parcels that are impacted in that southeast quadrant of the intersection. But yeah, there would be, it's pretty closely split, I guess, with the 8 and 9. The introduction of the new frontage road on the south side of the roadway is really where those additional properties, since there's not a frontage road that exists today, where on the north side there is. So that's maybe one of the main differences between the two sides.
So why does it have to be so far south from 36 unlike on the north? I'm not an engineer, so I'm sure there's a very perfectly logical reason for that, but just in layman's terms, why does it need to be so much further south?
Yeah, council member, it's really to provide good access spacing. So if you look at the intersection of 62nd Street and then 60th Street, and then where this new intersection for the new South Frontage Road is, it's to provide kind of that equal spacing between, and really trying to get, again, good spacing between those intersections. You know, with the River Valley Christian Church relocating this part of the project, you know, there's, I guess, opportunities to shift that south intersection south as well.
Administrator Schroeder?
So just for council's information, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this intersection here, the Button Hook, is roughly funded with a contribution from Lake Elmo of about $4.5 million. If Lake Elmo wanted to have the tight diamond with Button Hook, you'd be looking at Lake Elmo alone putting in an additional $10.5 million roughly. Is
Yeah,
that-
I mean, if they're, Administrator, you know, if they're, well, maybe taking a step back, you know, we see this as the cost feasible option. If there's a partner agency that is really pushing for the tight diamond, we would expect them to come to the table to help,
Yeah,
you know,
so,
close
yeah,
that gap of
so
10
if
million.
council
So,
was not approving of this and we wanted to do the other one,
Yeah.
theoretically, if we wanted to bond for an additional 10.5, or maybe a total of $15 million, we could present that to the county
Yep.
and say, we're willing to bring our checkbook to this.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
The second question is, you're looking for municipal consent for approval from this governing body in April, is that correct?
Yeah, so I'll jump back to next steps. So, you know, in addition to that, additional analysis that we're looking at, if, you know, part of the plan, if Keats closes and that frontage road extends, we do need consensus from the project team. And so that project team includes the Federal Highway Administration, MnDOT, City of Grant, City of Lake Elmo, and Washington County. So that team has to all come together and support one preferred alternative. And so, as the administrator was indicating, to attain that consensus from the City of Lake Elmo, we will be back seeking a resolution of support from the city in the next few months. It doesn't have to be in April. Honestly, we have to probably get it by June, I would say, just to keep us on schedule. But, you know, we're available anytime between now and June to come back and kind of request that resolution support from the city council.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Hearn, did you have a question earlier?
No,
Aye.
thanks.
I guess I'll go over my last slide here, kind of looking at long-term next steps, really over the next 2 years. So we're gonna work to complete the environmental documentations and obtain any necessary permits, complete that property acquisition, complete final design, and then obtain a signature from the city engineer on the final plan title sheet. We would then execute a cost and maintenance agreement with the city, open bids, and then seek city concurrence on a low bid to ensure construction can begin in 2026. So some of those bolded items are, you know, times that we're gonna come back to the city and really ask for kind of concurrence as we continue to move through the process.
Just for education's sake, Lake Elmo is scheduled for $4.5 million for the tight button hook. What would be the contribution from the city of Grant?
Yeah, so most of those costs are with that new frontage road on the south side of the roadway. That would be a local street that we would assume that the city would own and maintain. And so the cost to construct that, you know, I think that $4.5 million was estimated maybe a couple of years ago. So as we continue to move the process, that number may change. You know, with the federal and state funding that we brought to the table, we usually use that to buy down everyone's costs. Then again, that number might change. But when we're looking at our cost policy, we are planning on applying our cost policy to the city of Grant. Because the city of Grant is a smaller city, less than 5,000, they don't receive state aid, they are treated differently, according to our cost policy. And so the majority of their costs will actually be a 50-50 cost split for any separated trails proposed along here. We are proposing a separated trail that crosses under the new bridge of 36, so we would apply that policy. So City of Grant would have some participation, but because they don't have a road along here, their participation is smaller than the city of Lake Elmo.
Thank you.
Councilmember Beckstrom.
So one more question. So on this button hook, so could you just pull the slide up again with that picture of the button hook? So am I correct that the design of this button hook is similar to what we have like at the DeMontreville entrance to 36 where you've got an acceleration lane to merge in? So it's essentially that model?
Yeah, it is similar to DeMontreville. You know, this, I would say the setback of the frontage road is more, so you can get a larger radius curve coming in and out of there. But it does have an acceleration and deceleration lane coming off those ramps. We're gonna continue to explore, you know, best practices to make those as safe as possible. We may look at, you know, trying to better separate that deceleration lane from the main travel lane, just because there is different speeds as, you know, folks are exiting or entering the highway. So we're gonna look at essentially enhancing those as much as practical.
Yeah, to me, it doesn't seem like it'd be much safer than what we have, perfectly honest. Just having traveled 36 with those lanes, I'm curious, the safety, how safety is assessed in these plans and how this one compares. Because I wouldn't think this model would be as safe as some of the others, but again, I'm not an engineer, so.
Yeah, we did do that, there's that SSI score, which looks at vehicle safety, you know, looking at, it's on a scale from 0 to 100, 100 being good, 0 being poor. You know, looking at no build, if we did nothing here, that scored a 5. And then the 3 alternatives that we shared at the last open house in January, those all scored fairly similar. The tight diamond with roundabouts did score the best. I guess in our opinion, it wasn't significantly different. And really the reason why that scored the best is because of the roundabouts that are proposed, is really slowing everyone down as they're entering those intersections. So that's really the main difference between the two.
So for a layman such as myself, I'm not an engineer. I mean, I see a 55 for the button hooks and a 66. That's an increase of a fifth in that score. That's adding an additional 11 to it. What does that mean to a driver? Like, what do we tell a constituent to say, we're going with something, hypothetically, that is a decent chunk less? What does that mean in real terms for their drive?
Yeah, I mean, they all scored good. If you just look at it, that good, fair, poor. Again, going from a 65 to a 55 isn't a significant difference. And really the additional property impacts and the additional cost to get us from that 55 to the 65 make this project, it makes it more challenging to deliver. And so, again, the overpass with the button hook design, you know, looking at that matrix, looking at the primary needs and secondary needs, they all scored good. And they do it by minimizing the project footprint, minimizing the property impacts, and really having something that's cost feasible. So that's a way that I guess we're looking at it.
Probably the closest intersection that mimics this is on Hamlin Avenue when you try to go east on
Yes.
36, and there's a button hook that goes around that,
That church right there.
yeah, that thing, so, anyway, so.
Okay. Can I dig into that SSI a little more?
Yep, and then,
Or
yes, yep, and then we'll probably move on to the next item.
I guess just to follow up again, I mean, because I agree, I would love to be able to give some context to that for myself and for residents. Is it 55, some sort of per 1,000 cars, there's one accident? Is that factored into that? Or I guess,
Yeah,
I mean, like, that would probably be the biggest one, is like, does this give us some sort of data point on how many accidents we can expect when this is complete versus one every 2 weeks currently?
Yeah, I mean, again, if you look at the no build compared to, I guess, the preferred, it goes from a 5 to a 55, which could be like a 10 times improvement here. I don't think the SSI score would give like projected crashes, based off the volumes. It's really looking at crash potential. So it looks at the angle of the crash, it looks at the volumes that we have at potential intersections, and then it looks at the speeds of vehicles traveling. So it's looking at potential of like injury crashes at these intersections. Again, the roundabout, the design that had the roundabouts does a really good job at minimizing those angles, so it's kind of just a side swipe versus like a T-bone, and it does a really good job at slowing everyone down. So when you look at that, the roundabout scores slightly better than the button hook design.
I've been relatively quiet because I think all three designs are very good and will improve safety significantly. I share some concern about the amount of property in the button hook on the Lake Elmo side. That's mostly infiltration basins and ponds there. But I share the administrator's thought on maybe, if the tight diamond interchange is preferable for us, maybe we need to look at some options how we might do that. I think they're all good, personally. But I don't want to understate the concerns that the rest of the elected officials have stated as well.
And $15 million is nothing to laugh at either. I mean, I think ultimately that's going to be this council's decision, which is, what are you willing to pay for?
But, I would say we're doing this for the next 40 years.
Yeah.
It's a big number, but we're doing it for a very long time.
Jack?
Council, just wanted to point out, if you start to look at the other options, one of the things that, it's not here to look at, unfortunately, but both the tight diamond and the tight diamond with roundabouts shows the north frontage road being rerouted around the Grant Business Park. What I've heard at the table sitting there is that Grant won't vote for that, and we need consent, we need a yes vote from both councils for the preferred option. So I'm anticipating that even if the city was coming up with 15 million to make one of those options go, you still may not get it. It's just another hurdle to overcome.
Thank you for that. So next step, do we want to have a council item on this on a future packet before we even have a vote to have additional discussion with all five? Because we're not having a vote tonight, obviously.
Yeah, if we don't need to have municipal consent until May, we can schedule something I already have it on the schedule for, I think, like the 19th of April, to have another discussion point on this. And we can invite the county back if you want to bring them back, or,
Come on back.
so I'll let you guys know what that date is, and we can come back and talk about it some more. Because I agree, this is a big decision, and my personal opinion, we should build it for 40 years. But that's just my thought.
So what happens if we take a stance similar to what Grant has taken and we don't agree with the button hook?
Yeah, I mean, so maybe some of the history of this intersection too. I believe it was about 10, 15 years ago. We did secure $10 million in federal funding to look at adding an overpass here. I believe there was no ramps proposed. We started moving through the process, but ultimately the two city councils did not agree on that design. And so we basically returned that federal funding and walked away from the project. So I guess there is a possibility that could happen again if we don't have consensus from the project team. I guess maybe one last thing to note, something that we're looking at too is, could we do the button hook style ramps on the north side and then more of a tight diamond ramps on the south side. We have, I guess, shared that with MinDOT. Right now, MinDOT's stance is they would not support that kind of mixing and matching of ramps, but something that we're considering if we do move forward with the button hook style ramps is kind of setting up that intersection and setting up the storm sewer ponds that we're not precluding those ramps in the future. So there could be things that we could do during the design to maybe set it up for, adding a more tight diamond style ramps in the future.
You'll make the bridge wide enough for ramp up and 3 lanes and, I mean,
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, sightlines at the bridge is important, so looking at that as well.
Well, I think it'd be appreciated to also take that into account. I saw that letter from MinDOT and I don't understand it, I'm never going to, but I couldn't care less if they're not mirrored. And each community has its own perspectives, and obviously the tax base for Grant is not the same, but we also have our own financial concerns as well to take into account. So I appreciate the presentation, Andrew, and thank you, Kevin, for coming as well. I believe we need to get on to our next item, but thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 3, Legends of Lake Elmo Sketch Plan Review.
Good evening, members of the City Council. I'm going to pull up a presentation here, so bear with me for a moment. All right, so up on the screen here, we have a sketch plan review for Legends of Lake Elmo. This is a project in an OP development that's proposed by Landucci Construction. So as an overview for you, sketch plan review is an advisory process that applicants go through as part of subdivisions. Certain developments are brought to the city council where some additional guidance on whatever the requests might be is asked for. In this particular development, we're looking at 110 gross acres in the northeast corner of the community. There are 22 of those acres, notably, are unbuildable, whether it be through wetland impact or just the presence of wetlands or a natural gas easement for their pipeline, Northern Natural Gas. There are 50 residential units proposed for this project. The infrastructure entailed here would be city water, which would be looped through the site. Community septic would serve the sanitary sewer needs for these residents, and a connection will be made to through the development from 50th Street to the street to the north. So here on the screen, you can see the site plan. This was included in the staff report, so I won't spend a ton of time going over some of the various details here, except for what feels most important for this discussion. So again, this proposal would have 50 single-family detached lots. Almost all of these lots would be over a half acre. Only one of them is less at about 0.47 acres. Again, there would be a connection from 50th Street North on the south side of this site all the way up to Linden Avenue North on the northeast corner. There are 11 wetlands on the property, and of those, it appears that all of them can be preserved. This development would be required, as OP developments are, to designate 50% of the land area as conservation and open space into perpetuity. So here on the screen, you can see the location within the community as well as the future land use guidance, which in this case is rural area development. The RAD future land use category allows 0.1 units per acre, of course, but with OP developments, additional density can be approved. The zoning is agriculture, rural residential. The entitlements that will be required after they go through the sketch plan process, major subdivision, and open space planned unit development application. They are requesting, I would note, additional flexibility beyond what's in the city's ordinance. That can be approved by the city, but it does require a supermajority approval. So we talked about this at the last time. We talked about an open space development. The city does have 10 existing OP developments, they're called. These were all approved in the period between 1997 and 2006, And so it has been some time since the city has approved one of these developments. The purpose of the OP development is to provide greater flexibility in rural contexts to maintain the rural character of the community. Primarily, this is agricultural and natural resource amenities. There are benefits that are provided through open space planning developments that have to justify the approval. There are some basic requirements for all OP developments. One is that density cannot exceed 0.45 units per acre. There's a step-by-step process for applicants to go through to allow for kind of thorough consideration of how the site's being developed and how the natural resources on site can be best preserved. Community septic is a requirement in this area. Notably impervious, one of the other developments that the county or the city reviewed was the Rachel development proposal. They also did request a deviation from the impervious area, and there are additional trail requirements for these developments as well. So just here's another site plan that has some color to it. You'll see the brightest lime green, that would be open space. You can see all the wetlands are included in that area. And then you'll have in the darker green, those detached single-family lots. The community septic is located near the center of the site. That's in that kind of red color. And then some of the storm ponds are proposed in blue. Again, this is a concept level plan, so some of these things have all not been fully nailed down, but this has gotten pretty far through the design to be considerate of some of the city standards. So there are some flexibility requests that go beyond what can be approved, just in the base OP ordinance. One thing to note is that 50 units are proposed, and under the review of the ordinance, 39 units would be the maximum. And this is because the ordinance does rely on buildable area. And in this case, you've got 110 acres, but only 80 or so are buildable, and so that would allow them to, if we took the 110 into account, build 50. But in this case, because we have to use the net developable area, that does take it down to 39. Impervious surface within the developable area does go above 25%. And again, that takes out the open space that's being preserved and just focuses on the 50% of the development that is being developed. There's one lot, again, that is less than 0.5 acres in size. And there is a street encroachment into the required buffer that I'll talk to you about as well that's proposed. So a few issues or considerations to work through. One is the enforcement of the 100-foot no-build buffer. And so buffers are required of OP developments that are adjacent to existing developments or future developments. You have 100 feet that are required when you're adjacent to an OP development, and 200 feet required when you're adjacent to a normal, just residential property that's not an OP development. So you can see, I'm going to move on to the next slide where I have a little more zoomed in. You can see the cursors on the screen on the west side of the property. This is 100 feet north, same, east, same, and then south. As I go to the next screen, you will see that around, this is called the Hecker property after the property owner. There is a 200-foot buffer required around that property because it is not an OP development, or it could not become one. So how do we enforce that 100-foot no-build buffer? There's not really an answer at this time other than to consider some of the challenges for that. If we do have drainage and utility easements, as an example, to enforce the 100 feet, then that would be a city responsibility to enforce that there's no building in that area. Another thing to consider is that there is a street encroachment in the buffer surrounding the Hecker property specifically. So I'm on the screen now that's a little bit more zoomed in. You can see the street that winds up from 50th Street North does kind of, it's aligned a little too close to the Hecker property, and it's not supposed to be going through buffers other than at 90-degree angles. So that would be one of those areas where additional flexibility is asked for. I would just note to you that on the on the north side, this area between the Hecker property and that street, I think that is where it's obviously at the closest. So I think that's in the neighborhood of about 20 feet from the property boundary to the extent of the right-of-way. And then the last thing I wanted to kind of talk about here is the city ownership of the common area. In most cases, the city is requiring that those outlots that are housing the open space be owned and maintained by the HOA. That is certainly what staff would recommend that the city require moving forward, but that is currently shown by this plan as being owned by the city. So just want to make that clear. That might be an issue because it would require ongoing maintenance from the city. Okay, so staff have provided some comments internally on the project. City engineer provided a good memo on some of those considerations for infrastructure. Notably here, public water should be looped through this site from existing connection points. There are trails that are provided. There would be other requirements for right-of-way and easement dedication. This is outside of the MUSA, so community septic does have to meet the state standards if it's regulated by either the state or the county. Fire chief did provide some comments as well. We also heard from Washington County on this request in the Valley Branch Watershed District. So that gets me to my recommended discussion questions for you this evening. These were listed in the staff report, but these will help to identify to the applicant some of the feedback that they will need to move forward. That being said, the applicant is here this evening and would be happy to speak to their application as well. So at this time, I can take questions or defer to the applicant.
Councilmember Dragisich?
Has anyone talked to the Heckers about the street being in that 200-foot buffer, and have they expressed any thoughts?
Yeah, I would ask that question to the developer. I personally don't know if there have been any conversations with that property owner.
I know you got one.
Maybe just some clarification here. So currently, this land is guided for rural area development, which would be 1 unit per 10 acres if this was developed as we have it intended for, or as we have it planned. With this, it would turn out to be, they're asking for 0.45 units per acre, which would be 4.5 units per 10 acres, which is above what the OPPUD would, what would that number be at?
So
Maybe
the
math would be.
Yeah, so the number that the applicant is requesting is effectively 0.58 units per acre. What's allowed by the OPPUD ordinance is 0.5 units per acre. The city does have a future land use category for this property that would allow, if outside of an OP development, only 0.1 units per acre.
Okay, I'm sorry, could you say that one more time? So the OPPUD allows them for 0.5 units per acre, but they're asking for 0.45 units per acre. Or did I
Yeah,
say that
so,
backwards?
yep, Councilmember Hearn, so the city code in the OPPUD ordinance allows 18 units on 40 acres, which comes out to 0.45 units per acre. So that's what's allowed by the city code when someone receives approval for an OPPUD.
Okay,
Now, in some cases where there's additional flexibility requested by the applicant, the city council can approve that through that supermajority vote. That would be required to allow for the proposed 0.58 units per acre. That's proposed by the applicant. That is greater than and would therefore require the flexibility request.
great, thank you.
Yep.
And then remind me again on the impervious, 32% compared to what was the allowable?
25%.
25.
Yep. And one of the things that was discussed during the Rachel Development Project proposal was that that 25% is only the area that's not being preserved. So in other words, the applicants aren't having that open space count, help them to, I guess, in their favor to meet the 25%.
Is there any requirement on the open space on conservation easements of who holds that and maintains it or does that?
That is a great question. So that's something that we're currently working through right now. Administrator Schroeder mentioned the question about conservation easements. Historically, the Minnesota Land Trust has been holding these easements. I have been informed, I haven't asked them directly, but I've heard that they have no longer accepted new easements. And so one of the things that we have to do is figure out what's the legal mechanism for managing these required easements? Of course, if we're going to require conservation into perpetuity, some kind of easement should be necessary, but how exactly do we do that? We have some ideas, but we don't really have any firm recommendations for you at this
Yeah,
point.
so I just wanted to kind of point that out to make sure that we're thinking, but, you know, it's like, it'd be a conflict to have an HOA do it, because, well, that doesn't make sense either, but who else would do it? And the land conservation, land trust basically, and my understanding is they don't want to be in the business of doing these smaller type things. You have a 500-acre farm, sure, they're all over it, but they don't want to deal with these smaller parcels because it's getting cumbersome for them to deal with that. But that's just from my conversation with one person.
You would like to hear from the applicant for your question?
Certainly.
Mr. Landucci?
Thanks. Nathan Landucci, thanks for having me here tonight. Yeah, so to answer your question about the Heckers, I haven't spoken to them in a few years, but they've owned that land, I believe, their spot there for about 8 years. I think I've owned my land there for about 10 or 11 years, but I spoke to them and we actually got through the council, we got through we actually were in talks with them before, and essentially we came to an agreement. Now, this is years back, but they said they were fine with the alignment back then, but we had offered to plant a lot more buffer trees in that area. So this is very reminiscent of a plan that was done back in like 2018, and that had the same alignment, plus or minus. I mean, I think very close. And then we just put in a ton of buffer trees that kind of satisfied they knew the road was going to be closer in that section, and because of that, we just planted a bunch of buffer trees. So I haven't talked to them in a couple of years, and I can definitely reach out to them again. So I don't want to put words in their mouth, but that was the last conversation we had.
So I was here for that 2018 one, and I'm just curious, at a high level, quick 3 sentences, what's the difference between this plan and that plan? Because my memory is not perfect.
This is very similar. The two things were the community septic. At that point, I think we were stuck on a couple things that we didn't move the plan forward. It was 50 units like we're proposing now. We were just, I had a previous engineering company working on that, and we were trying to get individual septic systems back then, I remember. And we looked at that option, that didn't pan out. And then the other thing we were looking at was having a low pressure way to get the sewage to the treatments, to the drain field. So that would be grinder pumps and this low pressure, 2-inch PVC that a lot of the developments have, like Discover Crossing has, what else? Sanctuary has it. I mean, a lot of, actually just, Whistling Valley has it too. So I think all of the previous OP developments, or most of them, Jack's saying no, okay, but 3 of them for sure, I know that I built in. There's 3 of them that have that low pressure system. So we went away from that, and we're proposing a gravity system, which we were a little hesitant to do before. But so that was the change. And then I think cement curb and gutter, we were trying to avoid doing the cement curb and gutter, and now we've adopted that as well. So I think back in 2018, this proposal is kind of consenting to all of those things that were kind of up in the air, and so.
And with the style that you're proposing for community septic, would that be able to plug and play with city sewer at some future point when they need to be bailed out?
Yes, yep, and
Yes, I can take it. Hi, I'm Mitch Hanso with Larson Engineering. So the septic system we have designed is a communal septic system that gravity drains from the north end of the site to the center, and then from the south end of the site, kind of to the center of this site. It has the possibilities of connecting in a development to the north to it or to the east of it. But then if you were to do that, you would have to upgrade the pump system and whatnot to the septic field at that time to be able to handle the capacity, because currently it will only handle the capacity of what homes are being proposed in it.
And it's not the pipe size, it's the actual
It would
lift
be-
station, right?
yes, it would be the
So the
lift.
lift station, we have one lift station in there, and that lift station would obviously have to get bigger if there's more than, I mean, right now we're proposing 50 homes. I don't, maybe it'll do 100 homes, but beyond that,
I do think there's a little more to it too with the systems that they have cleaning it before it goes into the drain field. But it does have the capabilities of being expanded. And there are already set aside reservation areas where we have tested it and it can be turned into a septic field in case current existing septic fields fail or they ever need to expand. Because we have heard in the past in Lake Elmo, some septic systems have failed.
We have gone to multiple community septics and build them out with city sewer.
Right.
So that is on our mind
right.
frequently in terms of the importance of making sure it's done right the first time. So that is a concern that is definitely on my mind. I'll reserve my question for later.
So your system's a pressurized mound then?
I guess I'm not sure, I'm not the designer of the septic system. But I do know when we went pretty thoroughly in the design of the septic system. I believe we had, was it Stantec?
Stantec, yeah.
Look into it, and there was only one place on site deemed feasible for it. And extensive geotechnical studies were done to look into that, because we knew it was a big component of the development.
Jack?
Yeah, just to try to simplify that whole, the key to rescuing the systems is that the sanitary collection system under the public right-of-way is a gravity system, so that the city can take over the collection system ownership, rather than it being a small diameter pipe system just for that development. So, so the key is that it's a gravity system. The difference, their previous submittal was a low-pressure system, which wouldn't allow that. This system has a gravity system now. So you just have to drop a new lift station at their treatment plant and a force main to where you want to discharge it to the public sewer.
Thank you. Councilmember Beckstrom or Councilmember Hearn?
Okay. If you could just speak to a little bit, so we had an open space PUD come to us a few months ago, and you know, they had brought up concerns about kind of like from the financial side of it with some of our ordinance currently with the OPPUD, that with the way that we have it structured right now, that it just wasn't financially feasible. Now, if you don't want to answer this, I totally understand. You know, I see this plan and I see that you're asking for more than what's allowed with the OPPUD. It's more than what would be allowed with what it's guided for currently. Is that factoring into this? Is this not even feasible when we're at the 40
.45?
point, yeah, the 4.5 units per 10 acres or the 0.45 per acre? Is that just not feasible?
Well, yeah, great question. Thanks for asking that. So this has been a challenging site. I mean, I've owned this for 10 years. I'm on a good cost basis, obviously, because I bought it 10 years ago. But this is not a very great site for a developer to develop. And the reason is exactly what you said. You know, right now, the city design guidelines, you know, specify that we have to have, you know, curb and, you know, concrete curb and gutter. That gets really expensive. We have to have a trail, so every foot of center line, we have to have a center line of sidewalk. And in addition to that, we have to have a bunch of trails going through here because there's a county corridor. So we're not only putting in trails, but we're putting in sidewalks, the concrete curb and gutter, and then the sewer infrastructure. That's a big cost to us. So I think just the lift station, I can't remember what the cost of that, but I think it's like $150,000 or more just for that one lift station. So it really financially burden, you know, 39 lots financially. I know the council doesn't make a decision based on that, but it wouldn't be financially, it wouldn't work for us to do 39 lots. So, you know, these are already gonna be fairly high-priced lots, and it's gonna be a very nice development. It's gonna be very similar to like a Discover Crossing or a Sanctuary or a Whistling Valley. So it's gonna be very nice, very similar to that similar feel. It's a beautiful piece of land, and then there's 17 acres of wetlands, which kind of create, that's another hurdle that we have to deal with. So, so long story short, yeah, this isn't, this isn't a great, it's hard to develop, I guess is my answer to that question, especially if you're buying land currently at today's market value. It doesn't really pencil out. And in fact, if I was buying this now at the current rate, it just wouldn't make sense, even with 50 units.
Okay.
So, but, I'm a builder too, and we build high-end homes, so, we don't have to make a ton of money on the development. We're also getting lots and being able to build, the houses that we do every day. So that's kind of part of my motivation. If I was just wearing my developer hat, I probably wouldn't do it.
Okay.
So,
Could I, one more follow-up question on that?
Yep.
And this is actually for Administrator Schroeder. So in our meeting with the Planning Commission, wasn't one of our high priority items to come up, or to work through the OPPUD ordinance again and to review that?
Yep, we just talked about it today. Jason is looking at it. We were just talking about requirements for sidewalks and trails and other things in there. So that will be coming back up in an updated fashion. I don't know, do you have a timeline on that?
Not yet, but it should be in the next few months.
And so I guess maybe I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, but I think that's one of my concerns with this right now is, I'd prefer to work through that entire process first. I know we went forward with another one, and unless I was wrong, my understanding on that one was the way that it was guided for development, they could have put in more units per acre than what they were doing with the open space PUD. They want to do the open space PUD because they wanted to preserve the character of it, of Lake Elmo. And, and I really appreciate that. So I think it's coming from different avenues. Now, it's a business, you have to make it work. So and I think that's why we're having these conversations about this OPPUD, because that was the first time it came to our attention of maybe this isn't even financially feasible.
Right.
When it's something that we want to encourage.
right.
So I guess that's just one of my concerns right now is, maybe this might be something I'd prefer to wait until we have those discussions. But this is really helpful feedback for when we have those discussions, because again, I would rather see more OPPUD developments, if that's an option for developers, because I think it preserves the character of Lake Elmo a lot better than some of the other developments. Nothing wrong or against them, it's just I think it does preserve some of the character.
And as you are looking for feedback tonight, I guess I would echo to a part the aspect of we have had this conversation, and I personally am of the view that, yes, this property is a beautiful property, but that doesn't mean it has to be developed. And the 100-foot buffer, especially on the western end where there's multiple units going through that 100 buffer, is a concern for me. I do have a concern about having the outlots owned by the city, as that is not really something that we are good at doing, and it's not really something that I would want us to be doing in terms of that future maintenance for those outlots. And I do appreciate putting in the concrete curb, doing it the right way, having 28-foot streets for public safety. Those things matter,
Right.
and they are important. Updating the community septic so that it can be a plug-and-play, I would prefer it's not at all, and that it would be individual septic personally, but I do have concerns about the amounts per acre and that buffer along the western end. But as to Councilmember Hearn's point, it might be something that it's a future conversation as well, and that probably doesn't help you in that regard. But I believe Councilmember Beckstrom had said it well a couple meetings ago, just because it's here doesn't mean it has to be developed. So I'm kind of in that spot. Councilmember Beckstrom.
That's true. I did say that, I think.
Yes, you did.
But I think the PUDs, that's Lake Elmo. That's the character of Lake Elmo that we want to maintain. And so I'm less likely to make a lot of changes to those areas, simply because that's what we want Lake Elmo to be. And sometimes I feel like as a city, we compromise some of our some of our requirements to get builders in, and I think that's wrong. I mean, I understand the financial side of it, but there's also the city side of it, that we're trying to protect the character of our city and build in a consistent way. So I think with this one, you got time, in my opinion, because this would, in my opinion, be a premature development because we don't have water. So I'm gonna continue to ride that one until we have more water appropriated to us. So, so as far as I'm concerned, you have time to work on this, because I wouldn't approve this anytime soon until we have a change in the DNR appropriations. So that's kind of where I'm at on it.
Councilmember Dragisich.
Well, I said, my concern really is the road and the buffer zones and how the neighbors might perceive that. If they weren't opposed to it, there's some compromise with the trees, I would be more willing to accept that, because it's rural in nature. To me, the buffer to the neighbor might be very, very important to their enjoyment of the property, and we have that as a standard. The encroachment on the westerly side to the 100 feet, it's residential lots. I'm not so as concerned about that, because that'd be somebody's yard, and it's not going to likely cause problems if there's development to the west. But
I would just like to mention that on the homes in the buffer, on the westerly side or the southern side of the site, those houses would be built outside of the buffer. It would only
Yes.
be the driveway that would encroach within the buffer
Alright.
area.
That clarification helps, thank you.
Yep.
Any other thoughts?
Could I just add to that a little bit? So with the 200 buffer, I personally, with the way that it was presented tonight, would not support that. You know, I see that as, and I guess it kind of goes along with point number 3, are we supportive of the request for additional density? I didn't do the math, but I have to imagine that if you take those houses out and put the roadway through where it is outside of that buffer zone, that we would probably be getting closer to the 0.47, am I saying that right? 0.45 units per acre. I think it would get it closer. So since we're already over in density, I see that land being better used for the roadway to get there and not having to have the roadway go into that 200-foot buffer zone. With that said, it still comes back to, you know, it would put me more in, that would at least resolve that issue for me. I don't know if it resolves all the issues, though.
It appears, Mr. Landucci, you have some things to chew on in the short term, but I think we do want to get along. We are running a little late. But thank you for the information. It does help, and I'm sure you can be in contact with staff as we move along, but I do think we need to go on to our Limerick Village sketch plan review. So thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you for your
Thank
time.
you.
All right, the next item. This is a return of Limerick Village. It's still in the sketch plan review process. Return to the city council for a review. This design has progressed since you last saw the project, so we'll talk about that and some of the feedback that this applicant is looking for. Again, just as an overview for you, the site is in the southeast corner of the community. It's just under 80 acres. There are, I don't know if there's any wetlands on site. I'm not sure if there has been a delineation completed at this time. There is an existing home on the property. In the neighborhood of around 760 units are proposed. This would very likely be through a planned unit development process. Infrastructure connections, this is a site that is non-contiguous with existing development, so just as a reminder, city water and sewer would need to be brought to this site and then through it at the expense of the developer. They are aware of that requirement and submitted a plan that I'll go to on the next slide that shows how they can get that done. There is also required realignment of Hudson Boulevard. and an extension of Fifth Street North. So on the screen, you can see, this is the infrastructure plan that was provided with the packet. A couple things to note, obviously Hudson Boulevard would need to get realigned, there would be water and sewer in that same alignment, and then water would have to get looped with this development providing a considerable number of additional units. Okay, here's the site plan, should we need to come back to it. This is pretty similar to what you saw last time, and I'll talk about some of the changes as we discuss density, because we did talk about a comp plan amendment possibility last time. So in terms of future land use guidance, the site is split with a guidance of medium density and high density residential. Medium density requiring between 4 and 8 units per acre, high density between 8 and 15. The zoning for this site should be aligned. Currently it is rural transition, but it eventually would be medium and high density residential. Entitlements required for this project notably would include an environmental assessment worksheet. That would be at a minimum for the environmental review. If the project gets through that process and doesn't need to go any further with environmental review, then we would expect a major subdivision, rezoning, and planned unit development request. Currently, with what we're seeing, I would actually fix the slide to read, actually, comprehensive plan is not required as proposed at this time, and I'll talk about why. So here's a zoomed in view on the site, and you can see the current future land use guidance. On the next screen, this is the city's MUSA growth and phasing map. This project is within the 2020 to 2030 development decade. So as comprehensive plan conformance goes, you'll see, we talked about some of these things last time. I'm going to kind of go through this slide quickly, but the land use guidance on the top right corner of the slide. Now I'm going to switch to the site plan, and you can see that the site plan and the density exhibit that was provided by the developer now very closely aligns with the future land use guidance. And so the developer has determined that they don't want to go through any comprehensive plan amendments for the project. And so we have worked with them to help them understand what are the requirements to stay out of a comp plan amendment. And what you see on the screen now does accomplish that. We have worked with the Met Council staff to make sure that this project wouldn't need a comprehensive plan to the future land use areas as proposed. Yep.
Can I pause on that? And I'm not the designer. Would that also hypothetically mean that the line itself can be changed as long as the total gross acres remain the same?
That's a good question. So, if the developer were to try and move, like if we have 10 acres of HDR and we want to stay having 10 acres as an example,
Yes.
we can't move the line at all. It has to stay fixed, and so a comprehensive plan amendment would be required were we to move, well, I'll call it the green and the pink. If we were to move them into some different configuration, even if we kept the same area, a comp plan amendment is still required. So
in other words, if the council felt that they wanted something different for the view shed along Manning and wanted to flip,
sure.
even if the acreage is the same, it's still a comp
Correct.
plan.
Correct. Yep.
Wonderful.
Yep. So, and I think going back to the guidance here, you can see on the, again, that top right, when the city creates the comprehensive plan, to some degree, it's a little bit speculative. It's saying, we want on the Manning corridor high density, and we're going to taper it, as we go north, and then we're going to have medium density and transition that into low density residential. That's not uncommon, but what that does when you get developments is it means that if they don't want to do a comp plan amendment, then they are going to have to work within the confines of where we draw the lines. And so that is the case here. And so the developer's proposal does accomplish kind of meeting that high level of guidance and specifically providing the number of units that they need to within each area to meet the density guidelines. So again, the pink, the medium density, that's got a floor of 4 units per acre and a ceiling of 8. And so they're at just over 4 units per acre in the pink area. And those, you'll see a lot of detached single-family homes, and so that's about as closely as you can get single-family homes with still meeting that floor of 4 units per acre. And then in the green area and the high-density residential, they have a floor there of 8 units per acre and a ceiling of 15. And they are just under that ceiling of 15 units per acre with the type of development they're proposing. So I'm going to keep things moving, and you can feel free to stop me where you have questions. The zoning, I'm not going to get into this really too deeply at this point. We've kind of focused on a high level on design considerations, and so we've really also worked on the review of the site relative to the city's design standards manual. So I'm going to move to the next slide here. I wanted to share the exhibit the developer provided for open space. With PUDs, 20% of the development should be kept as open space, and so you can see they're showing you how they will accomplish that requirement here. The center of the site is proposed to be both a city park and a stormwater pond area. And we'll talk a little bit about the proposed improvements in the center of the site as well. First, I'll talk about the different elements of the site, the different units, and some of the considerations for both flexibility requests and then some of the design considerations that the city will have. So we'll start on the top right, Lot B. These are rental townhomes. These are 20-unit buildings, rental townhomes similar to, I think it's the Springs development just north of Hudson Boulevard. So it does appear that a PUD flexibility would be required for setbacks for I'll call them the accessory garages. They're on the north side of that site. That is a triple fronted lot, which means that all sides on a public road, Manning, Fifth, and the internal Limerick, those would all be treated as front yard areas. Design considerations. So one of the things that we've heard in conversations with the city's fire chief is that we would be looking for a more grid-like pattern of these buildings to facilitate the circulation of emergency service vehicles. Another key consideration for this site is its location along Manning. This is a highly visible corridor within the community, kind of gateway to Lake Elmo. And so treatment of how the site's buffered from there, in addition to the architectural materials, should definitely be kind of closely considered. And lastly, the relationship between open space and landscaping also kind of creates the feel for this particular area of the site. Lot A is the 3-story apartments. These were initially 4-story. The units have been reduced to make them 3, as far as I can tell. Here, we do anticipate a request to deviate from the city's minimum lot area. That minimum lot area is based on the units in a multifamily building. And so in this case, with the number of units, we would require 10.66 acres. Currently, just under 5 are being shown here. The parking requirements and how they would meet would be determined based on the unit mix, so we just don't have enough information at this time. It's possible that deviations could be needed in the future. Some design considerations for you is that this is definitely the most prominent corner of the site. It's got visibility perhaps even from the frontage road serving Interstate 94, so this is very prominent. The materials on these buildings, the massing where they're located on the site, these are all very, very important for, what staff heard last time is that architectural and design was going to be very important for this project to meet the character of Lake Elmo, and so this is a very important part of the site. Surface parking definitely should remain internal so that sort of the prettiest parts of the site are shown to the rest of the world. Then connectivity from this site to the open space is also important, as we don't have a ton of open space on this site, and they're requesting to be under the minimum lot area. So these are on the south, mostly the south area of the site, front-loaded townhomes. They range in 4 and 6 unit attached townhome buildings. The city has a requirement to avoid parking in front yard areas, which this would require a deviation for. Some design considerations is, again, these townhomes are going to be most highly visible from Limerick Parkway, which is that internal street. It is possible to have them kind of double loaded, and what that means is having an entry on kind of both sides of the building, It's possible that the buildings could open out onto this open space, the central open space, and be rear loaded with a garage in the rear. Another important consideration here is for buffer units, or sorry, buffering the units on the south from future industrial or business park, commercial development. Lastly, we have a mix of different single-family lots that are proposed. 50-foot wide, 40-foot wide, and 35-foot wide single-family detached lots are proposed here. The most prevalent lot proposed is the 40-foot lots. The 40 and 35-foot lots would not meet the city's minimum lot width requirement. We would also expect that they would need side yard setback deviations to have a reasonable building footprint. They're probably gonna have at a minimum a 2-car garage, and so it'd be something that staff would wanna see is how, if these are front-loaded, meaning that that the front of the homes face the street, that's gonna be a lot of garage doors, so, staff just kind of encourage you to discuss that particular point of this proposal, and I think seeing layouts at some point would be very helpful for how those sites are laid out. Good landscaping and building materials can really help in situations where we've got buildings in close proximity. So just to summarize, this slide here just has all those flexibility requests that I've kind of talked about. I would add one thing is, this is still a concept plan, and so as additional details are provided to the city through potentially future applications, we may identify more needs for deviations. That's kind of the nature of the game here. We have gotten review comments from internal review staff and others. Jackson City Engineers comments, number one, this is obviously non-contiguous, so those infrastructure connections are very important. Hudson Boulevard alignment is going to be also part of that, and phasing is important here as well for utility and road connections. City's fire chief has kind of echoed some of those concerns about phasing and always providing 2 points of access for emergency services. And we've also gotten comments from Washington County and Valley Branch. Parks Commission did have an opportunity to discuss this at their meeting on February 21st. There was a discussion about with the applicants on the area of the park that's proposed, and specifically 2.5 acres are proposed to serve the park dedication needs. This is in a park search area for a neighborhood park. The commission did vote 3-2 to recommend that the developer provide more land for park dedication closer to the 10%, which would be somewhere in the neighborhood of between 7 and 8 acres. There was a minority on the commission that suggested cash in lieu or a combination of the land proposed and cash in lieu as well. And here is a figure that the developer submitted after that meeting to kind of demonstrate how the city park might be laid out, and also how that works in tandem with the stormwater area. And so I'm sure the developer who is here this evening would like to speak to this particular figure as well. So I have some recommended discussion questions in the packet for you this evening. Number one, is the park suitable in terms of location and area? Some of the deviation requests that we're seeing as well would be helpful to get feedback on. So that's what I have formally prepared for you. I would note that the applicant is here this evening and probably eager to speak to their request as well. They did share some exhibits with me, which I can pull up on the screen and provide them for their discussion with you. So happy to stand for questions.
Council.
Yeah, just one clarifying, so with Lot A with the 3-story apartments, if we go back to that slide, so it was 10.66 acres required for 258 units. And the way they're presenting it would be they're trying to fit 258 units onto 4.96 acres, is that correct?
Correct, yep, that's what's being requested.
So then, if I'm doing the math right, with the 4.96 acres presented, it should actually, what the allowed without a variance would be 121 units.
Yeah, so if you found whatever, it's like 1,800 or something square feet per unit is what that unit based count is. That's what we're gonna use in terms of the math. So I'm sure you found that and did the
Got
math
it.
correct.
Okay, great. And then with the medium density land, so obviously we're right at the bottom edge of that, with the 4.1 units per acre with how it's proposed right now. So they really, with their current plan, they can't just get rid of a few of those or make them slightly bigger. They would be below it. Would other options then be, they would have to do apartments, but more
That's-
spaced out?
That's a great insight. That is the case. So, with the MDR, the pink area on the screen, they have the option if the idea is to get wider single-family lots, then the way to accomplish that with the guidance is to have more attached units somewhere within that pink area.
Okay.
Yep, because that's gonna be a little bit more efficient in terms of the density.
So to repeat, when we're talking about the medium, if we didn't like the lot widths, throw in an apartment, helps with the density. Other lots then could be widened because need to have less of those skinny lots. I got
Right,
that
yeah,
right? Okay.
yep, exactly, council member. So if the goal is to have wider lots, then the suggestion is to include perhaps more townhomes. You could look at an apartment building, whatever the attached type of unit is, might likely be more efficient. I do, just hearing from the developer, and I would encourage you to ask them of the market demand for these types of products and of course why they're proposing them, but, yeah, it would appear that there's some options, right, to hit above 4. So.
And obviously, we're not, it's sketch, the landscape plan has not even been submitted. Is it presumed at this point that even with what's proposed at a high level, would there be enough room to even start with berms on the east and south? In addition to vegetation, is it even possible, because obviously that changes everything in terms of how drainage works.
Yeah, Councilmember, that's a good question, I think, for the designer of the site. I would imagine that introducing berms is gonna make things a little tighter, for sure.
And then I guess last question on my end, in terms of the process we have for our master parks plan, in the stage that we're at right now, has that group had discussions yet as to parks capacity for this end of town in light of a proposal for 700 additional units, which
Yeah.
is potentially 2,000 people?
Right, that is a great question. If you'll look at a map that just shows kind of the service areas for existing parkland, the southeast corner of the community is definitely, I would say, the least well-served, just to kind of say it that way, in terms of, access to parkland. And so there is definitely concern, and that's part of the reason that a neighborhood park search area was included in the comp plan for this part of the community. When you're introducing 700 to 800 units, that is a considerable number of residents that may not have quick access to a park. So getting a park in this area of the community, a public park, is seen, I think, at least by the comp plan as important.
Councilmember Beckstrom.
So along that line, with the Park Commission's recommendation, to have a larger park in here, did the developer make any changes or recommendations for what that might look like?
We don't have any figures or revisions for like alternatives for the park layout itself of the land. The developer did want to provide this figure, and I'll let them speak to it, that shows how a park can be laid out and some of the idea of the features within it, because I think there were some questions at the planning commission about what can this land really be used for? Like, does this have enough space for the amenities that we feel like we need? And so I think the developer is trying to answer that question.
Yeah, that would be my concern with this, when you're putting in that many units and that many people, and we don't have parks in the area, and that's my concern with this and another development is we're not providing enough space from a park standpoint for people to get out and easily access. So that would be my concern with what I'm seeing so far. I don't think 2.5 acres is enough.
Would you like to hear from the applicant? I guess if you could just start by addressing right there, Councilmember Beckstrom's concern and somewhat mine as well.
I've got all different slides, so I'm gonna hit present and you'll just page back and forth using the arrows.
Oh, I see.
Yep, yep.
Well, thank you, city council members, for allowing us a chance to come back and talk through some of these issues. I will start with the park. I think, first of all, the park area that's designated in this area is a much larger overview of the entire area of this southeast area of Lake Elmo, not just our site. And so we're responding frankly to the idea that the park that was required in here was for a neighborhood park, not a regional park. Also, taking out more land doesn't allow us to accommodate and meet the requirements that, as we all know, the Metropolitan Council has placed on this site for both the high-density and medium-density residential. I did want to say that if you look at the layout that we provided here, I think that the 10% rule is a baseline that's not really a baseline. It's a suggested number that I know that's been through the courts and a lot of different arguments and all the rest of it. I'm not gonna get into that. But what we were trying to show in the illustration was, well, what really gets done in here? What can you build in an area that's that big? And we try to dimension this out and show pickleball courts and, tennis and a soccer field and so on and so forth. So there's plenty here. And when you look at that in conjunction with the private community areas that are both planned for the apartments as well as the rental townhomes, you start to get back to where you need to be with the idea that there would be other park areas that would be connected through the trail systems and all the rest of it on other properties in and around us. That's really what the general area was drawn to accommodate. We don't have a regional park requirement here. Having said all that, the real driving force in here, we're not trying to hide it, is to try to meet the high density and medium density requirements that have been placed on here. And when you start to take land out of it, there's no way to come back to meet those requirements. Now, back to how we tried to do this. The idea here is, with these smaller lots, single family, is to meet what I would call more of a value baseline that we have. I don't want to just load this up with townhouses. That is not our goal here. We were trying for something higher quality. And if you look at the lot sizes we have, they're very similar to what you have right down the road here, which is at the Inwood project that M&I Hans Hagen did. That's what this is
Can
gonna.
you just go back a couple slides on your
Sure.
thing so we can see the main overview?
Sure, sorry about that.
There we are. Thank you.
So, two things we were trying to address with that. One is, one of the comments that was made in our initial meeting with you was about reuse. There would be association maintenance across all of these units now. Now we can take the pond and we can reuse across everything here with common areas across the site. Not just in the rental part, but to go back across the entire 80 acres here. So that was a benefit. The second part is that the side yard setbacks that you approved already with the Inwood project that Hans Hagen M&I did, we really wouldn't even need those kind of reduced side yard setbacks. We feel like we could make that happen, and we're developing and building this kind of product in other areas of the metro and all of our master plan communities. We'd invite you very strongly to go see those. They're absolutely selling like hotcakes. I don't even know any other way to say it to you. It's the type of thing that people are demanding. It's just a different market now than perhaps what you were discussing in the previous applicant's presentation. I'm not saying there isn't a place for that. I'm just saying that there's a place for this too, and they sort of complement each other. So back to the requirements. To meet our medium density baseline, we were trying to fit in here something that we thought would be of higher quality and not just load this up with townhome units. And the townhome units as a front-facing gives it more of a walk-up. It's not the back-to-back units that can be a little bit too dense, frankly. It provides more of a brownstone kind of look, and that's what we were trying for there. So I hope that helps answer at least what we were trying for here, more than anything else.
So then clarifying question, as we're looking at the southern side, and we have a great deal of experience with this exact issue in a development just to the west of here. And we're looking at Third Street North and potential units there, townhomes, correct?
Correct.
That are then buffered up against a property that's future zoned for a far more intense use. And I'm just curious in terms of the placement, because I understand there's a diagonal going northeast to southwest, generally speaking. Is there any reason why those are in that location versus, say, spreading the 3 apartment buildings lengthwise along that? I'm just asking the question just because I view those as being different in terms of the expectations of being next to a higher level, more intense use. I don't see a townhome as, I would see a user of a townhome as having a bit higher level of expectation for that barrier, the ability to prevent that view shed than, say, someone in a 3-story apartment building. Just my 2 cents.
Well, I think you have to define intense use. The hard fact is that industrial uses aren't quite as intense, and you really have the back of a building that's also buffered, and you have privacy back there. We've done a lot of it. As I mentioned at our earlier meeting, we finished a project up in Maple Grove where we had residents that were backing up to a Hy-Vee. And the Hy-Vee, the back of the building was, I guess, the best neighbor you could ever imagine because it's being well maintained. There isn't traffic right up against them. The traffic is on the other side of the building.
I would say the issue that we've experienced is that of buildings that have a certain height and light pollution. And that's been, and it's specific to development just to the west, and it is definitely on the concern of this council and our residents, and that is one of the reasons why we strengthened our buffering code recently, which is why I had asked the question earlier, is there even space to even help with a berm in addition to vegetation along the south and the east side?
Well, I don't think a berm is an answer. If you're talking about something that's 4 or 5 feet high, even as a berm area, are you talking about planting trees on top of it? I don't know that accomplishes much.
In a berm, as an example, we discuss in our code that as one way to help with the view shed when you're going from a less intense to a more intense, that you take advantage of a berm height and plants, because then you have kind of a 2-for-1 in terms of adding that additional height, especially from day one. So just throwing that out there. In terms of second question, I guess we've had a lot of discussions on this council and previous council about architectural style, and I know I fully approved of an apartment complex just to the west here that was 4-story and flat on the basis of it's a new style, it's in demand. And I'm curious, what style are you looking for these apartments? And since these are 3-story, and technically you would have the ability to have a hipped roof.
Well, I'm not a fan of hip roofs, but I will tell you that I think that the roof lines have got to be compatible with a residential kind of feel. I don't think a flat roof really fits, this particular application. And at the end of the day, we're perfectly comfortable with the architectural, the vertical construction coming back for your review. And that's the way we typically handle all of our master plan communities. The builder comes back with both material sources and with a complement of here's some choices, here's what I plan to do, and here's a roof line for your review and approval. I mean, that's where we're headed. At this concept stage, I really wasn't prepared to discuss that, but.
The packet does include architectural styles for some of the units that you propose.
Yeah, we were trying to, provide some insight into what we were thinking about.
Those are my questions for now. I do appreciate in terms of the water reuse, connecting the entire area to that is critically important for your infiltration to be able to then use that for irrigation throughout the neighborhood. That is a critical tool.
Well, I do want to say this. As I mentioned in our last meeting, you know, we've got probably the 5 biggest master plan communities in the entire metro right now. And I think we're pretty good at providing buffering between commercial and residential uses, and industrial uses for that matter. But I think the truth is that I really don't think berming is an issue, is really the answer. I think what ends up happening with those things, they don't end up getting maintained correctly over time. It looks great at the beginning, but 10 years from now, that berm doesn't look like it looks today. I think we're far better off with landscaping that's very well thought out, that has some volume to it, that can provide some kind of natural buffer. Frankly, that's true between the different products that we have here. We'd like to see that kind of separation. But I don't think berming's the answer, and that's true whether it's along Manning or on the south end, and that's my opinion.
Councilmember Beckstrom.
Yeah, I think, as a developer, you've probably run into this where we've had mixed uses there, next to each other. Just over the past couple years, being on council, this was a new issue for us coming up, where we've got townhomes next to some commercial or residential next to commercial. So we're just highly attuned to the complaints that come from that and our learning. So I certainly would be open to seeing whatever solution you might come up with that would buffer that, but certainly buffering would be an expectation there. I just wanted to clarify my concerns or questions around the park. I was not looking at this as a regional park by any means. I was really simply looking at just the density you've got in the high density that we have, just making sure that there's adequate space and places for the people that reside there to get out with the apartments and with the multifamily buildings, just making sure that there's space for them on site to get out of their homes, get out of their apartments, and to be able to be outside with the idea that eventually there will be connections, trails to other parks. But I just want to really be cognizant of having that available. Otherwise, we run into some problems, potential problems with just a lot of people with no place to go. So.
Councilmember Hearn, and then Administrator Schroeder.
Oh, well, I was just gonna ask if we could go back to the discussion ones, the points that they wanted clarification on. So if you had a question.
I just had a quick question on the clubhouse. I may have missed this, but I see in this plan here, you have a clubhouse with a pool. What kind of amenities are gonna go in there?
Typically, the clubhouse are meeting rooms, and there is some areas where people can hold parties and things like that, and then the pool speaks for itself. We tend to leave that up to the builder and the user for that, but, this plan was taken right off of the Springs plan that you have right up the street there, and
Okay.
that's what it is.
All right, thank you.
I'll just make an anecdotal comment. We just proposed this in another area at our Amber Fields project down in Rosemont. The Springs concept didn't work, not because of approvals, but that was approved, but just for financial reasons. So we got another user there, and our lot count went from 260 units down to 132. This just happened the other night. That happens now. And how do we react to it? How does that really work? Well, the way it works is that you don't have the density here, but you have a little bit higher quality user. You have them with an expectation that the rents are gonna be much higher than they would have been with that much more density. So, keep in mind, this is conceptual, and it's gotta work at the end of the day. But there is some great flexibility there. We see it a lot, so.
Councilmember Hearn.
Yeah, I'm just, I guess I was ready to touch on a few of the points on kind of my thoughts on how I.
Can you go back to that
recommendations. So, yeah,
slide?
we can go to those, unless there was any other questions. So I guess I'll touch specifically on that second bullet point with the 3-story apartment parcel. I feel like in that situation, again, the 10.66 acres is required for 258 units, and we're presented with 4.96 acres there, then we should try to get that closer to the 121 units that would allow. You're at the top end of the allowed density for the high-density residential. You're right at that 15 mark, so there's wiggle room there to go down and still meet the requirements. I think that would probably either mean then, again, just looking at that, either one of those apartments go, or they go down to 2 stories. But I think something needs to happen there. I'm not in favor of allowing increased density outside of the parameters just for increasing density's sake. In situations where we have to increase density to meet the requirements of the zoning. I think there's reason to do it then, and I don't see that in this situation for the.
I appreciate your
high-density
comment,
residential.
but let me just offer just one anecdotal comment about that. We sell a lot of apartment sites. I built a lot of apartments. The truth is that the big change lately is simply that we don't put parking lots in the way we used to. We just don't do it that way. We have underground parking specific to the building, and we leave surface parking and try to contain it at a minimum to contain the impervious surface and not create these monster parking lots that have no value. I think that's what you're seeing in the difference between the kind of proposal we have here and, the typical 10 acres that's required for that. And I'll just say this, that, one of the ways I'm gonna go try to solve this is I'm gonna go back, I'm gonna find out if there's a senior user for this, because I don't need cars anymore and I don't need parking. And that's one solution, and we do it all the time. Is there a market for that here? Yes, there is. And that can happen. But you're not gonna meet some arbitrary parking requirement with that kind of user. So we'd be right back here talking about maybe a lot less units, but probably in the same area.
Councilmember
So
Dragisich.
the apartment units will have parking beneath them?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
I guess, and I don't know, anybody else have any thoughts on, I guess I kind of skipped ahead to that second point there.
I guess I'm having trouble with the first one because no, we weren't talking about in terms of a regional park. On our end, we don't have the experience of a proposal with potential 700 units in a single area at once. We have 700 units when you combine multiple neighborhoods at once, but for perspective, Carriage Station, their park is 2.7 acres, and it has a couple amenities. You have the shelter, you have the playground, you have open space, and it's similar to this. This obviously has the additional clubhouse. I would be curious, so if the question is that of number of units in the medium density, again, if you plug and played with various things, if you threw out a single apartment building in the medium density, you would not only be able to change the widths of your parcels, you might open up a parcel or two for maybe a playground over there. I'm just throwing that out there because it is allowed in medium density apartment.
I don't believe that's correct. Go ahead, Nathan, if you.
And if I'm wrong, correct me.
Hey, Councilmember, can you just repeat the question so that I
Is
make sure?
apartment allowed in medium density? I don't
Yeah, so the answer would be yes, you can have attached units, you could have an apartment in the medium density zoning district.
So I guess I would throw that out there in terms of possibilities. I don't know what the right answer is. I guess in terms of since the styles were thrown out there, and I don't want to get caught up in styles per se, but I also believe in variation. The styles that were thrown out there are similar to styles we have in other neighborhoods. So if there are other options that you have in terms of not a barn feel, not a rural feel, I'm trying to think of what the style is, but other options to, again, this is a main corridor, this is a main access point, and we had discussed it last time in terms of the view shed. What are other things that add that variety? I'm a strong believer in, obviously this is a variety of housing stock, but I also believe in a variety of housing styles, and we really haven't had that type of neighborhood really since Fields of St. Croix, where we have that rural feel for architecture. So I guess it might be time to bring it back.
Well, let me answer it this way. we're here to work with you. This is about the 9th or 10th iteration we've been through with staff. That's not your problem. I'm not crying on your shoulder. But I will say this, if we're gonna get to something that everybody's gonna be happy with, then allow us to bring back several iterations that you can peruse and give us feedback on, rather than us trying to go back with staff, come back with a plan. Now we got a plan, we think we've met council's requirements as well as some of the other ones. Why not just throw it all out there on the table at some workshop? And I realize your time is limited too, but I'm happy to do that. We've been through a lot of different scenarios over the years, and I can tell you that we get to the finish line with some pretty agreeable components, simply because, you know, every city's a little different in terms of what they're looking for with that fit.
Yes.
You know, with that fit.
And on my end, I guess, and we've had this and then I'll wrap up. We had this conversation with development downtown kitty corner from Lake Elmo Elementary in terms of, in order to be a PUD, there needs to be a value gain to the city. And to me, there is definitely a value gained in terms of extending Fifth Street, in terms of realigning Hudson, in terms of being able to have a level of density that actually brings down our per-person water use, which is completely inverse of logic, but that's the way it happens. So there are value gains to the city, but I also want to make sure we're being very thoughtful in this process, and it sounds like you want to be as well, Councilmember Dragisich.
Well, listen, in the 30-foot single-family lot list, did you say that the development, I think it's MII, has 30-foot lots?
There's a variety of that we're providing for them right now. I think we told you at the beginning of this, so we had David Weekly was one of the users we had, and we're doing lots just like this for them. We have some iterations on here that we had provided for you the last time. We can show those to you. But suffice to say that essentially what they are detached townhouses that provide some privacy for people that goes beyond the regular townhouse.
Yeah.
And I will say that I think when you really see it in mass, when you really see them up in a neighborhood, you really get the sense that there's far more value to that than just throwing a bunch of townhouses up here, by any architectural definition, and that's what we were trying to do. I still think that's a good fit. I really would like you to at least consider that.
I just thought if they're somewhere to go and take a look at them and kind of get an impression of what they look like when you're sitting on the street and saying, what does this development look like?
Yep, they're, we've got a site down there that you can see all that put together with M&I on one side, with regular single family on the other side, with David Weekly doing what they're doing, with Lennar doing their townhomes, and you can look at the whole sort of parade of it, if you will. And that kind of diversity in that housing, it does draw you. You're looking at it, and you don't see anything too much like that. It's pretty pleasing to the eye, frankly. I realize that's not Lake Elmo. Believe me, I've been around a long time. I know what Lake Elmo is. But there is a component of this that is trying to be fit into a high-density area, and we're trying to make it of a higher value.
Where I grew up on the Iron Range, their 25-foot lot was the standard for
Yeah.
many, many years. And so,
Yeah.
the houses weren't very fancy, but you could open up your window and pass, some coffee to the neighbor next door without anyone going outside.
And a hot dish.
In a hot
Well-
dish, if you wanted, yeah.
Well, we're back there, trust me. That's the way I feel about it anyway. I just want to reiterate one last thing. Our goal here was simply to get to the point where we could jump off and start an EAW. Remember, it's going to take us the rest of the year just to do that. If you're uncomfortable with that, we understand that, and we'll come back with more plans and work with staff and do what we got to do to come back with something different.
Councilmember Beckstrom? Oh, sorry. Well, was it a feedback or question?
It's feedback for
You want to
the,
go first,
Go
Councilmember
ahead.
Beckstrom?
It doesn't matter, I guess.
Feedback?
mine's quick, just on Third Street, on the southwest corner, we're gonna wanna see a connection from Third Street to the single-family 35-foot lots there instead of a cul-de-sac. That won't work for the city to have those two dead ends down there, so.
Councilmember Beckstrom?
So I would just be remiss if I didn't put that on the record, and probably surprises no one, but we continue to have a water issue in Lake Elmo, and we have not gotten more appropriated water. Hopefully, by the time you're able to bring this back for approval or bring a PUD, I truly hope that we have that resolved. I think this, there's a lot of nice things about this. If we could get a little more parkland, that would be super. But again, we do have a water issue, so just FYI.
And again, that we were trying to speak to that with the timeframe that it takes for the AW and for more planning as we come into 2025 is probably where, what we're thinking.
Suffice to say, feedback is continue with your work and take the feedback in, but definitely be cognizant of this feedback. And
Commission, can I ask one, or Council, can I ask one additional feedback question? Sorry.
yes, sir.
Would the city council be considerate of a comprehensive plan amendment if that lends itself to a better layout? The lines are drawn how they're drawn now. There's some very strict guidance that the applicant would need to follow to, as they make changes to the site plan. I just want to ask the question, just so we have it from you. If a site plan that feels like it works better would require a comp plan amendment, is that something the council is open to?
Shifting the line, but the acreage is the same, essentially.
Yeah, something of that nature. If that were to be proposed, just curious how that would be received.
I mean, my 2 cents is I find that to be a rational policy decision, even though it would be a comp plan, but that's me.
I would agree.
I'd have to see it. I can't weigh in that without having it in front of me, so I typically say no to comp plan changes, but again, I'm always open to review, so when the time comes.
I would say the same. I'm open to it. I still think that there's options with this. I think I was consistent with the last time we met, where I had the same concerns with the density on the high density residential. So I think that's consistent with the feedback I gave last time, and I think it moved in the right direction. It's just not there. On that same note, with the 30 to 40 foot detached, again, that's an example of where allowing variances to meet that density requirement, it makes sense, and it's needed for those things. So I'd be open to the conversation of an amendment, but I still think that there's something very workable here, and I think it's close.
To clarify, you weren't asking about a change to the amount,
No.
just a change of where the line is drawn.
Yep, members of the council. So, I guess theoretically, if I would refine my question, theoretically, if we were to keep the exact land areas the same, and I would expect that's required based on our discussions with Met Council. If the land areas were to remain the same, but the line were to be adjusted somehow, I guess that would be what my question is. And I'm not suggesting that, it should change. I suppose the question is simply if a site plan that feels like it works better necessitates that, just making sure that we ask the question to you before they pursue something like that.
Yeah, and part of it would be is if we're gonna change those lines, as Nate had said, if we change the area and we say remove areas from high density because we don't like that much density, we're gonna have to find another spot in the city to put that high density. And, you think it's tough trying to put a development in, try to change it to change the density next to something else. So, yeah, we would certainly just change the line, but we wouldn't change the square footage of each area.
And that was the way I understood the question.
Hi, well, thank you for coming tonight, and thank you all for attending. We now have items for future work session. Administrator Schroeder.
I actually don't have that sheet up on top of me. The computer I brought down does not have Excel on it.
So it looks like first up would be a crosswalk policy.
Yeah, so Marty is gonna be bringing back a general education for crosswalks. We've had a request for 39th Street, and one of the things we've talked about is do we paint? What is the efficacy and the protective measures of painting versus putting up the crosswalk? These people have particularly said they would pay to put those solar-powered crosswalks in it. Is that a policy the city wants to look at? If we do develop a policy, we're gonna be facing many people who want to have crosswalks. And so we have to have something we can land on, not just for this intersection, but everybody who would petition, and how does that work from their Old Village Master Plan is coming in on the middle of April, and we're gonna be coming back and giving you the 2007 master plan, which we paid a company to do, and you can review that, and then we would basically make a decision, do we wanna go down that full road of having a master plan developed, or do we wanna just say, what are the allowable uses within the current zones we have in the village, and what do we wanna see in there, and just do a kind of a quicker review, that'll just take a few months. So that will be kind of, we won't finish it that night, but we would like you to give feedback to us so we can come back with a proposed use change or acceptance. Washington County Yard Waste presentation will be looking at taking yard waste in the Lake Elmo Park Reserve. And that will be something that would be for, not only for Lake Elmo residents, but for mid-county Washington County. So we're gonna do a presentation on that. And then public safety funding is a fire department thing, so.
Thank you for that. And with that, at 8:35, meeting is adjourned.